All right. We mentioned earlier that executive power is a bit vague as it's laid out in Article 2 of the Constitution. So how far does that vagueness extend? Um, should presidents consider themselves confined to their so-called Article 2 powers or any powers that Congress statutorily gives them? If so, can the president effectively execute laws expeditiously and efficiently? The authors cite John Locke, who contended that for executive power to be effective, the executive has to be presumed to have an inherent right to act in the absence of formally authorized powers. We used to call this inherent power, and that used to be in all the textbooks. So now Richard Pius has written extensively about prerogative powers, and he distinguishes between two kinds of prerogative power. On the one hand, you have soft prerogative power, which is an instance where a president is sort of filling in the blanks of an existing law. On the other hand, you have hard prerogative power, where a president is clearly acting in opposition to the law, presumably in the national interest and presumably in emergency situations. I think Pius would agree that the presidents invoking prerogative power are engaging in risk acceptant behavior, which is a fancy way of saying they're placing their popularity and their legitimacy in jeopardy when they invoke prerogative power. Abraham Lincoln is often invoked as a president who is widely considered by constitutional scholars to have violated the Constitution consistently. In the spring of 1861, he issued a string of executive actions which were widely viewed as unconstitutional. He ordered the blockading of southern ports without a congressional declaration of war. He suspended habeas corpus, which was a power reserved to Congress. He called up military troops. He expanded the size of both the Army and the Navy, again without authorization from Congress. He spent money without either authorization or appropriation from Congress. And he broke into people's mail and read them. And then he basically rejected a Supreme Court order that habeas corpus had to be respected. So all these actions fall under Pius's notion of a pretty hard prerogative. Lincoln's justification was simple. The survival of the nation required these actions. The text, of course, offers a famous quote from Lincoln justifying it. Are all the laws in the land but one to go unexecuted, and the government itself to go to pieces, lest that one law be violated? Even in such a case, would not the official oath be broken if the government should be overthrown when it was believed that disregarding the single law would tend to preserve it? It cannot be believed that the framers of the instrument intended that in every case the danger should run its course until Congress should be called together, the very assembling of which might be prevented, as was intended in this case by the rebellion. So history has generally viewed Lincoln's actions as justified and indeed reasonable. What do you think? Did Lincoln start us down a path, down a slippery slope to a kind of constitutional dictatorship where a string of presidents have steadily expanded executive authority in ways that have slowly leached the democratic impulses out of the government? Something to talk about.